Really? A new model of the universe? Let's see what Ouspensky is saying. I like to examine all what these motherfuckers say and put forward my own arguments. Let's see. Reasoning by analogy with the existing dimensions, it must be supposed that if the fourth dimension existed, it would mean that side by side with us lies some other space which we do not know, do not see, and into which we are unable to pass. It would then be possible to draw a line from any point of our space into this domain of the fourth dimension. In a direct, it would then be possible to draw a line from any point of our space into this domain of the fourth dimension, in a direction unknown to us and impossible either to define or to comprehend. Yeah? If we could visualize the direction of this line going out of our space, then we should see the domain of the fourth dimension. Now, geometrically, this position has the following meaning. Geometrically, this proposition has the following meaning. We can conceive simultaneously three lines perpendicular and not parallel to one another. These three lines are used by us to measure the whole of our space, which is therefore called three-dimensional. If the domain of the fourth dimension lying outside our space exists, this means that besides the three perpendiculars known to us, determining the length, breadth, and height of solids, there must also exist a fourth perpendicular, determining some new extension unknowable to us. Then the space measurable by these four perpendiculars could be called four-dimensional. We are unable to define geometrically or to conceive this fourth perpendicular, and the fourth dimension still remains extremely enigmatic. The opinion is sometimes met with that mathematicians know something about the fourth dimension which is inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Sometimes it is said, and one can even find such assertions in literature, that Lobachevsky discovered the fourth dimension. During the last 20 years, the discovery of the fourth dimension has often been ascribed to Einstein or Minkowski. You've got to remember that this book was written in about 1916. Yeah. I remember the first time I read this book, I couldn't believe it. I thought, fuck me. I mean, this kind of like, this shit was being thought of and mused about and hypothesized about back in 1916. I thought, what the fuck were they teaching me at school? Yeah, in 1969 and 72, anyway, back to it. In reality, mathematics can say very little about the fourth dimension. There is nothing in the hypothesis of the fourth dimension that will make it inadmissible from a mathematical point of view. This hypothesis does not contradict any of the accepted axioms, and because of this, does not meet with particular opposition on the part of mathematics. Mathematicians even admit the possibility of establishing the relationship that should exist between four-dimensional and three-dimensional space, i.e., certain properties of the fourth dimension. But they do all this in a very general and rather indefinite form. Yeah? No exact definition of the fourth dimension exists in mathematics. Lobachevsky actually treated the geometry of Euclid, because I'm tired, folks, it's late at night, actually treated the geometry of Euclid, as in Euclidean space, i.e. geometry of three-dimensional space, as a particular case of geometry which ought to be applicable to a space of any number of dimensions. But this is not mathematics in the strict sense of the word. It is only metaphysics on mathematical themes. Sounds like stereo instructions. And the deductions from it cannot be formulated mathematically, or can be formulated only in specially constructed conditional expressions. Other mathematicians regarded axioms accepted in the geometry of Euclid as artificial and incorrect and attempted to disprove them on the strength chiefly of certain deductions from Lobachevsky's spherical geometry, and to prove, for instance, that parallel lines meet. Yeah? They contended that these accepted axioms are correct only for three-dimensional space. And on the basis of their arguments, which disproved these axioms, they built up a new geometry of many dimensions. I should sit up straight, and I wouldn't keep fucking up the speech, would I? Right, they built up a new geometry of many dimensions. Let's sit up straight. But all of this is not geometry of 4 dimensions. The 4th dimension could only be considered as geometrically proved when the direction of the unknown line starting from any point of our space and going into the region of the 4th dimension could be determined, i.e., when a means of constructing a 4th perpendicular is found. It is difficult to describe, even approximately, the significance which the discovery of the 4th perpendicular in our universe would have for our knowledge. The conquest of the air, hearing and seeing at a distance, establishing connections with other planets or with other solar systems, all this is nothing in comparison with the discovery of a new dimension. But so far, it has not been made, even with a Large Hadron Collider searching for the Higgs boson particle. Anyway, back to the book. But so far, it has not been made. We must recognize that we are helpless before the riddle of the 4th dimension, and we must try to examine the problem within the limits accessible to us. After a closer and more exact investigation of the problem itself, we come to the conclusion that it cannot be solved in existing conditions. The problem of the 4th dimension, though purely geometrical at the first glance, cannot be solved by geometrical means. Nah. Our geometry of 3 dimensions is as insufficient for the investigation of the question of the 4th dimension as planimetry alone is insufficient for the investigation of questions of stereometry. We must find the 4th dimension, if it exists, in a purely experimental way, and also find the means for a projective representation of it in 3-dimensional space. Only then shall we be able to create a geometry of 4 dimensions. Even slight acquaintance with the problem of the 4th dimension shows the necessity for studying it from the psychological and physical sides. The 4th dimension is unknowable. If it exists, and if at the same time we cannot know it, it evidently means that something is lacking in our psychic apparatus, in our faculties of perception. In other words, phenomena of the region of the 4th dimension are not reflected in our organs of sense. Yeah? We must examine why this should be so. What are our defects on which this non-receptivity depends? I must find the conditions, even if only theoretically, which would make the 4th dimension comprehensible and accessible to us. These are all questions relating to psychology or possibly to the theory of knowledge. Further, we know that the region of the 4th dimension, again, if it exists, is not only unknowable for our psychic apparatus, speak for yourself, but is inaccessible in a purely physical sense. This must depend not on our defects, but on the particular properties and conditions of the region of the 4th dimension itself. It is necessary to examine what these conditions are, which make the region of the 4th dimension inaccessible or even inaccessible to us, and to find the relation between the physical conditions of the region of the 4th dimension and the physical condition of our world. And having established this, it is necessary to see whether in the world surrounding us there is anything similar to these conditions. That is, whether there are any relations analogous to relations between the regions of 3 dimensions and that of 4 dimensions. Speaking in general, before attempting to build up a geometry of 4 dimensions, it is necessary to create a physics of 4 dimensions. That is, to find and to define physical laws and conditions which may exist in the space of 4 dimensions.